We have Jamal Mecklai, CEO at Mecklai Financial. So you obviously have seen what the ECB did overnight. I spoke with Jim Rogers, right? Needs no introduction, wealthy private investor, and he's always maintained that all this printing is going to lead us to doom eventually. But he this morning sounded particularly worried about what he's going to do with all his wealth in about 2 or 3 years' time, because he thinks that all this printing will precipitate some sort of big global crisis. Yeah, I made that suggestion. I don't think he's buying into that one. But seriously, what's your view?
All right. Well, that's broadly what I've been saying too, except, I don't think the world ever ends, so I don't think it'll be as bad as that. But, I mean, I've been saying, I think every time we've spoken, I say, Baba, what's going on? I mean, something's got to give. But the other thing is markets are markets, and, you can sit and say something's got to give and lose money for 2 years or 5 years or 20 years while the market does its own thing, In fact, right now, I feel we're in a similar situation with the rupee, right? It started getting quite heavily what I would call overvalued, right, against a model that I run at any rate. It's about 2 rupees overvalued, right, because the dollar index is going up, money is pouring in because India looks good. It's exactly the same story we had in February to May last year, where the rupee again started getting overvalued. In May, the Fed, shook everything up, and then, it went off to the races. Now, how, again, as I said before, irrationalities, overvaluation can persist forever, right? But the fact is, I think you need to notice that if the rupee is that overvalued today, about the level it was when things started falling apart last time, you need to be more careful. So that's sort of the situation. And, the global picture, something's got to give. I agree. I think, Dr. Rajan has mentioned it many, many times. Jim Rogers is saying it. But markets only turn when all the smart people throw in the towel. So while there are so many people, and some very smart and very loud, talking about, boy, the world is going to end, it's not going to end. It'll only end when Mr. Rogers invests.
Actually, with your permission, Jamal, maybe I can just quickly play out a 40-second soundbite of Mr. Rogers.
We can't take this garbage anymore. We're not going to continue to take this paper money, which is being printed at such a rapid rate, and people are going to start selling their bonds. People are going to start selling currencies, trying to find a better currency or a safer haven. I don't know what it's going to be, Prashant, and right now I think I own the U.S. dollar, as we've discussed before. I think it's because when the turmoil comes, people will flee to the U.S. dollar. They will think it's a safe haven. It is not a safe haven, but people think it is. So people will buy the U.S. dollars. If that happens, I hope I'm smart enough to sell my U.S. dollars at that point. And Prashant, I don't know what I'm going to do with my money then. I don't know, because it's going to be very difficult with money printing around the world, people giving up on bonds, people giving up on all the artificial ocean of liquidity. That's going to be difficult for all of us.
Jamal, I don't think he woke up on the wrong side of the bed today. He's maintained that view for a while, but it came out much more passionately today when I spoke to him this morning, Jamal.
No, I can imagine, but as I said, for 2 years I have been saying that there is an issue, right? I agree with him in principle, but I'm saying you can't time the market. There's one other thing that's very interesting, that for 2 years again, I have been feeling, and I'm not alone, that the dollar had been falling and falling and falling, and it needs to go up. Well, it started going up, right? But it's only got to 83, 84. Now, up means what? I mean, when it started coming down, it was at 125, the dollar index, right? So it hasn't really gone up, So we could well see, as he's rightly saying, that, the euro is coming down, which is a very good thing. But maybe the dollar, people will flee into the dollar. Maybe it'll cross 85, 90, 95, right? Gold will come down, and then maybe there will be the big collapse he's talking about, and then gold will go up. So it's going to be a wild ride, Right now it's very quiet. you know, but is it the calm before the storm? You never know, you know. Markets are like that. Yeah? That's why I love them so much.
Unpredictable, right? Every day is a new one. Jamal, I just want to ask you, many in the market, the Fed did QE, right? They've been saying that very, very strongly. They've been saying, and I've had arguments. They say that none of that money found its. There are no leakages, right? Central banks hand over money to banks out there in the West to lend further. That money stays there. To argue and say that, you know, that money leaks out into the rest of the world, banks gamble with that and all, it's preposterous. Whereas there are other people who say, well, it leaks all the time. Where do you think these booms and busts, why do you think these booms and busts have happened across emerging markets? Because banks do, you know, take this money. They don't find enough attractive sort of lending opportunities in their home markets. They gamble with it. What do you think is happening? Do you think there are significant leakages with these kind of programs?
Well, I think that's really what had happened up till 2007, 2008, right? Since then, regulators have clamped down, you know. Certainly, I mean, maybe there was still some of, you know, there was a lot of trauma, 2008, 2009. I think the last few years, you see volatility has come down because regulators have clamped down. So, I mean, there is certainly money flowing into, let's say, India, into emerging markets. No question about that. But it's not, I mean, I don't understand what you mean about leakages. I mean, the central banks are buying bonds, right, because they want to try to stimulate their economies. I mean, basically, it's sort of like, you know, in the old days, going back probably before you were born or before you were on the air, you know, there was an expression we used called pushing on a string, you know. So it's like pushing on a string. It's not going to, I mean, you go to 0%. After that, what are you going to do? You know, if it's not working, then it's not going to work the next day, you know. So I think really it's and really to quote Dr. Rajan, he really says it rightly when he says, you know, monetary policy is being too aggressive rather than fiscal and structural change, which is needed. So ultimately it will be pushed to that, right? I mean, ultimately France and Italy are going to have to become more competitive. America seems to be, and for that you need, I mean, people have to recognize they can't take August off, right? We've been saying that for 10 years. They're still taking August off, right? In the US, okay, growth is great, you know, or growth great, but growth is picking up, but you've got some major issues there. I mean, in terms of rich and poor, black and white, you know, these things cannot sustain, you know. This is sort of, shall we say, a different time bomb, but as much a time bomb as the monetary policy issue. So I don't have the answer, you know. I'm just saying, and again, maybe this is, I'm getting a little older, you have to be cautious and conservative in markets. Even though it looks like the rupee is going to remain strong forever, it doesn't make sense to be completely nanga on imports. And boy, I have a tough time convincing people.
By the way, how old do you think I am, Jamal?
You sound like you're about, you know, 70. I don't know how old you are. But yeah, we haven't met. We do this always on, or not in a while at any rate.
Yeah.
Well, I'm nearly 70, you know.
Yeah, oh, yeah, of course. But you don't sound anything like 70, Jamal. I can tell you that. You can subtract about 30 years from there, from that number. I just want to ask you, Jamal, what do you think?
Yes.
So when
Fishing for compliments always.
When you say that, what kind of leakages, what I mean is very plain and simple, right? They buy bonds, they hand over cash to banks, and the banks use this money to, and I remember seeing this chart a few years back, JP Morgan's balance sheet, right? How much of this money has been spent, I can find that, maybe send it across later, how much money has been actually lent to consumers, and how much of it is basically used in investments. You know, and that investments, of course, these are global banks, and global banks, I guess, are the best routes through which all this money travels, yes.
No, certainly. I mean, you know, my God, people are, if you've got cheap money and you got not willing to, or you don't have stuff you want to lend it to, you will invest it. And then what you will do is you will start trying to increase the yield and get higher and higher risk investments, you know, high risk bonds, etc., emerging market debt, etc., etc. And then what you will do when things start getting a little hot, you'll try to find people to sell these things to, package them and sell them, There was a lot of talk, I think 2 weeks ago, about that happening, people. So we're getting close to the end of this cycle. I think I mentioned on one of the earlier shows that you can't really calculate time, dates when things happen. But if you were to judge from the last two peaks or last two turnarounds of the volatility of gold, the volatility of gold is scheduled, if it's exactly the same, to turn around on Diwali. Now the volatility of gold turns around and shoots up, that means markets everywhere go down. But ultimately I think that's an important thing also. And certainly I think that there will be some sort of drama happening. I don't know when. I'm saying Diwali, but it could be much later. But I think the good news for India is that while the economy has not really started picking up again, still very slow, sentiment has turned. So what I'm saying is, even if markets go down, and they'll go down everywhere, they'll go down in India as well, it will not go that far down. And it will recover reasonably soon. So despite all of the above, I think Mr. Rogers should put his money in India, Indian equities. I would. I do.
Yeah. He, whenever I ask him that question, he always says, I don't know what his view, I didn't ask him that question today, maybe I should have. But for the last couple of years, he always used to say, well, there's too much, there's too much, we can't trust policies, we can't trust institutions, government, this, that. So maybe now with this government change, he will look at a country like India.
He was correct. Yeah. No question. Absolutely. Maybe we should have a drink.
Jamal, so let me just come to India, right? There's a 100. I have one more question. Just a domestic question. 100 days, and you must have seen a lot of coverage about the 100 days of Mr. Modi, the Modi government. What is your own assessment of the 100 days? Because when the election results came out, many who feared the government, the dispensation change, said, well, this government is going to be very pro-enterprise, private enterprise. It's going to shrink the role of the government and things like that. But I don't think we've seen any of that. If anything, the focus of Mr. Modi has been to strengthening the PSUs, the PSU complex.
See, I think basically operations are getting improved. Tax compliance, which I think is, it's a critical thing, things like that. Waiting and watching. I'd like to see what happens with the PSU banks, which I think that's a critical thing because, it's in the finance sector which controls everything. I think generally, he's, so far so good, everyone is still waiting and watching, but generally everybody, sentiment is much more positive. The trick is going to be, as is clear. I was talking to somebody yesterday. He was saying, the fact is it's still a little too much me. Mr. Modi's running everything. Now nobody's Superman. And if you keep doing that, that could create problems further down the road. So like everybody, like Mr. Arvind Kejriwal needs broader help, Mr. Modi needs more help. He needs to have a stronger and more credible team at top, which is not easy to find because there are political constraints. But I would say so far, I'm frankly very pleased.
We're frankly very pleased, but I think it's an important point you make. Thanks very much for joining us, Jamal. I understand you have appointments lined
up,
so I'll let you go and hope we have you back soon again. Thank you.